What would you do if you walked into your own company and nobody knew who you were? Not a small company, a $12 billion corporation, with your name on the building, in 40-story brushed steel letters visible from 3 blocks away. That is exactly what happened to Natalie Samuel. She didn't call ahead. She didn't announce herself. She just walked in, plain black suit, no badge, no entourage, and sat down in the lobby like anyone else. And what she saw through those glass walls in the next 6 minutes made her realize that the people she had trusted with everything she had spent 15 years building were in the process of destroying it. Not by accident, on purpose, for money. $200 million of personal money, to be exact. While they sold her company, her mission, her legacy, her partner's dying wish, to an oil conglomerate for $3 billion less than it was worth. She had a choice. She could leave, go back to her lawyers, fight it through the courts, spend months or years while these men walked away rich. Or she could walk through that boardroom door right now, with nothing but the truth and 51% of the shares, and take back what was hers. She chose the door. And what happened in the next 72 hours is one of the most extraordinary things I have ever told you. Stay with me from the beginning, because the first twist hits sooner than you think. And by the time you get to the end of this story, you are going to want to send it to someone you love. Before I start, if you have ever been overlooked, underestimated, or written off by someone who didn't take the time to see who you really were, this story is for you. Follow this page right now, because we tell stories like this every single week. And share this one before it's over, because someone in your life needs to hear it today. Now, let's get into it. Natalie Samuel had not set foot in this building for 5 years. She stood on the sidewalk across the street, looking up at the 40-story tower that bore her name, Samuel Tower. The letters gleamed in brushed steel against the morning Atlanta sky, a monument to everything she had built, not from privilege, not from inheritance, not from a name that opened doors, but from nothing. From a girl who grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Decatur, Georgia, with a mother who worked double shifts at the hospital and a father who left before she knew his face. She had stood on this same sidewalk the day they put her name on the building. She had cried then, not from vanity, from disbelief. Now she stood here again and felt nothing but cold. The morning rush moved around her. Suits, coffee, earbuds, the relentless machinery of a city that never stopped moving. No one glanced at her. No one recognized the woman who had built the $12 billion company that occupied this building from the 32nd floor to the 40th. Why would they? She was just a woman in a simple black suit. No entourage, no badge, no name tag, just a face in the crowd. That was exactly the point. 3 weeks ago, an anonymous email had arrived in her personal inbox. No sender name, no signature, just a subject line that read, "They think you forgot." Inside were documents. 47 pages of financial reports that did not match the ones her team had been presenting to the board. Internal memos discussing a potential sale of Nexus Dynamics, her company, the Clean Energy Technology Corporation she had co-founded 15 years ago, to Vortex Energy, one of the largest oil and gas conglomerates in the world, the same industry that Nexus had been built to disrupt, the same industry that had tried to buy them out 4 times in the last decade, and 4 times she had said no. The email ended with a single line. "They think you will never come back. They are wrong." Natalie had spent 2 weeks doing nothing but verifying. Every number checked out. Every signature was authentic. Jonathan Mercer, the CEO she had trusted with her company after Randy Webb died, and Richard Hale, the COO Mercer had brought in 2 years ago, were planning to sell Nexus Dynamics to Vortex Energy for a figure that was $3 billion below current market valuation. In exchange, the two of them would receive personal equity worth a combined $200 million. A betrayal so complete, so calculated, that it had taken her breath away when she first understood the full shape of it. She had not called her lawyers yet. She had not contacted the board. She had not announced herself in any way. Because the one thing she had learned in 15 years of building something from nothing was this: before you make your move, you make sure you understand the full board. You do not tip your hand to people who are already playing against you. She needed to see it with her own eyes. She crossed the street. The revolving doors of Samuel Tower pushed cold air against her face as she stepped inside. The lobby was different now, sleeker, more sterile. The warm wooden panels she had personally chosen 15 years ago. Panels made from reclaimed timber from a forest in Oregon, chosen because she wanted the building to feel like it was rooted in something real, were gone. Replaced by white marble and glass that gleamed under light so bright, they felt aggressive. On the walls where her portrait and Randy's once hung side by side, framed in simple black, there was now only one face. Jonathan Mercer. A large, professional photograph. The kind you commission when you want people to believe you have always been in charge. Silver hair, easy smile. The posture of a man who had never once doubted his right to take up space. Natalie looked at the photograph for a moment. Then she walked to the reception desk. The young woman behind the desk looked up at her with the kind of expression that assessed and dismissed in the same glance. Pleasant enough on the surface. Efficient. The practiced smile of someone trained to manage people without making them feel managed. Can I help you? I'm here for the executive board meeting. The receptionist's eyes traveled down Natalie's body. Simple some black suit. No jewelry except a thin gold watch. A Patek Philippe that had been Randy's, which she wore every day not to signal wealth, but to remember what they had built together. No designer bag. No security badge dangling from a lanyard. Nothing that fit the visual profile of someone who belonged on the executive floor. Do you have an appointment? No, I'm sorry, but the executive floor requires prior authorization. The smile stayed perfectly in place. May I ask who you're here to see? Before Natalie could answer, a woman emerged from the elevator bank. Younger, perhaps 28, with sharp dark eyes and a tablet clutched to her chest. Her name tag read Elena Vasquez's, Executive Assistant, Office of the CEO. She moved with the particular energy of someone who had learned to anticipate problems before they became problems. Is there something wrong? Elena asked, looking between the receptionist and Natalie. This woman says she's here for the board meeting, but she doesn't have an appointment. Elena turned to Natalie. There was no recognition in her eyes. Why would there be? Elena had joined Nexus Dynamics 2 years ago. By then, Natalie had been gone for 3 years, her name fading from the internal narrative of the company she had founded. In the absence of her presence, the story of Nexus had been quietly rewritten. Not all at once. Gradually. The way powerful men always rewrite history, one omission at a time. Mom, the executive board is in a closed session right now. I'm not able to interrupt them. Elena's voice was polite but firm, professional. She was not being cruel. She simply saw what everyone in this building had been conditioned to see. A middle-aged black woman in a plain suit, clearly not someone who belonged on the 40th floor. Probably a vendor. Possibly a candidate who had taken a wrong turn. If you'd like to leave your information, someone will follow up with you. I'll wait, Natalie said. Elena hesitated, looked at the receptionist, looked back at Natalie. Whatever internal calculations she ran took about 2 seconds.
You can wait over there.
She gestured toward a row of chairs along the hallway leading to the executive wing. But I should let you know, the meeting could go another hour. That's fine. Natalie walked to the chairs and sat down. The leather was cold against her back. From where she sat, she had a clear sightline through the glass walls of the main boardroom on this floor. 12 men sat around a long oval table. All white faces, though one at the far end seemed pushed to the edge, almost an afterthought. A young black man she didn't recognize who appeared to be there in some administrative capacity. The kind of diversity that exists to check a box rather than change a room. At the head of the table sat Jonathan Mercer. Silver hair perfectly styled. Hands moving as he spoke, the practiced gestures of a man who had learned to perform confidence so long ago that he could no longer tell the difference between the performance and the real thing. Beside him sat Richard Hale. Leaner, harder, with the cold eyes of someone who had never once let sentiment interfere with a transaction. The kind of man who smiled only when he was about to take something. On the presentation screen behind them was a logo she recognized. Vortex energy. The deal was already in motion. They were not still deliberating. They were presenting. This was a done thing, or close to it. They were walking the board through the terms. Building consensus, making sure everyone in that room felt like a stakeholder in the decision, rather than a passenger being driven somewhere without their knowledge. Natalie looked at her watch. 1 minute. Employees walked past her without a second glance. Some looked at her and looked away quickly. The reflex of people who have learned not to make eye contact with someone who seems out of place. A black woman sitting alone in the executive hallway. No badge, no escort, no visible purpose. Clearly not someone who mattered here. She let them look. She let them decide what they thought they were seeing. 2 minutes. Through the glass, she watched Mercer gesture at a graph on the screen. She could not hear the words, but she could read the room. Nodding heads. No pushback. These were men who had been brought to a conclusion, not a deliberation. 3 minutes. A memory surfaced. 15 years ago. Not this building. They couldn't afford this building back then. A cramped, second-floor office in Midtown Atlanta that smelled like old carpet and ambition. She and Randy, sitting on the floor because they had sold the chairs to make payroll that month. A cold pizza box between them. The future uncertain, but somehow electric with possibility. What happens if no one takes us seriously? She had asked. Randy had smiled with that easy, unshakable faith he always carried. Then we build something so big they can't look away. What would he say if he could see this room right now? His name erased from the walls. His company being sold to the industry he had spent his life disrupting. His partner sitting in a hallway, invisible. 4 minutes. Natalie was not angry. She had been angry for about 4 days after reading those documents. Then the anger had burned itself clean and left something colder behind. Something more useful. She was thinking. She was seeing the full board. 5 minutes. Elena Vasquez walked past again. Glanced at Natalie with something that might have been pity. Poor woman. She doesn't understand how this works. Someone should tell her to leave. Natalie noticed the glance. Cataloged it. Said nothing. 6 minutes. She stood up. Inside the boardroom, Jonathan Mercer was still talking. Still comfortable. Still completely unaware that this most consequential meeting of his career was not happening in that room. It was happening in the hallway. Natalie walked toward the boardroom door. Elena appeared from seemingly nowhere, stepping between Natalie and the door with practiced ease. Mom, I told you, they cannot be disturbed. If you'll just wait a moment, I can call security and they can help you find your way to the right department. That won't be necessary. Natalie's voice was level, unhurried. The voice of someone who had spent 15 years learning that the quieter you speak, the more carefully people listen. My name is Natalie Samuel. I own 51% of this company, and I'd like to go into my boardroom now. Elena's face went through several expressions in the space of about 3 seconds. Polite dismissal, mild irritation, confusion. Then something that was not quite recognition, but was the first wobble of certainty. I'm sorry. Could you say your name again? Natalie Samuel? Elena looked at her, then looked at the gold watch on her wrist. Randy's watch. The one he'd worn every day for 20 years. The one Natalie had never once taken off since his funeral. Something shifted in Elena's expression. 1 moment, please, she said, and her voice was different now. Quieter. She turned away and pressed something on her tablet, typed quickly, waited. Natalie could see the screen from where she stood. Elena had pulled up the company's shareholder registry. She was looking at the name at the top. Samuel, Natalie A., 51.3% founder, majority shareholder. Elena turned back around. The color had left her face. Miss Samuel, she stopped. Started again. I had no idea. No one told me you were coming. I am so sorry I should have. You did your job, Natalie said. You don't need to apologize. She reached past Elena and opened the boardroom door. The room went quiet so fast it felt like a sound had been removed from the world. 12 men in expensive suits turned to look at her. Jonathan Mercer, mid-sentence, stopped speaking. His mouth stayed slightly open for a moment. The involuntary pause of a man whose brain has just received information it is not prepared to process. Richard Hale was the first to recover. He leaned back slightly in his chair and let a thin smile cross his face. The smile of a man who is already calculating his response before he has fully understood the threat. "Mrs. Samuel," Mercer said. His voice found its footing quickly, warm, professional. The voice of a man who had survived many difficult rooms. "What a surprise. We had no idea you were planning a visit." He stood, extending his hand across the table. "Please come in. Let me get you a seat." Natalie walked to the front of the room. She did not shake his hand. She looked at the screen behind him. Vortex Energy, Proposed Acquisition Framework, Nexus Dynamics. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at the men around the table, one by one, slowly enough that each of them felt seen. Several looked away. One of the men at the far end, older, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, held her gaze. She noted that. She would remember his face. "Gentlemen," she said. "I apologize for the interruption." She picked up the remote control from the conference table and turned off the presentation screen. "But I'm going to need this room. If you think walking into a room and taking control of it is easy, you have never been a black woman doing it in front of 12 white men who have spent years convincing themselves you don't exist anymore." What happened in the next 90 minutes was not a confrontation. Natalie had not come to fight. Fighting was what people did when they were afraid. She was not afraid. She had the documents, she had the shareholder registry, and she had something more powerful than either of those. She had done her homework, and they had not done theirs on her. Mercer tried 3 times to redirect the conversation. He spoke about continuity, about fiduciary responsibility, about the complexity of the current market. He was good. She would give him that. He was smooth in the way of men who have spent years in rooms like this, managing narratives, building consensus, making the people around him feel like they were choosing what had already been chosen for them. But he had made a mistake. He had spent 5 years believing she was gone. And in those 5 years, Natalie Samuel had not been idle. She had been watching. She laid the documents on the table one by one. The financial reports, the memos, the projected personal compensation for Mercer and Hale when the Vortex deal closed. She placed them precisely, without drama, the way you set out evidence when you already know the verdict. Mercer's face did not crack. Hale's did, just slightly, around the eyes, but he recovered fast. What cracked the room was not the documents. It was what she said next. "Gentlemen, I want to be very clear about one thing before we go any further." She looked at Mercer. "I did not come here to have an argument. I came here because this company is mine, 51% of it. And nothing about what is being discussed in this room, not the sale, not the terms, not the timeline. Nothing can proceed without my written consent, which I will not be giving." Silence. Mercer leaned forward. "Natalie, I understand this looks alarming out of context, but if you'll allow me to explain the full strategic picture." "I have the full strategic picture, Jonathan." She slid a folder across the table to him. "Including the equity agreement between you and Vortex's board of directors, signed 3 weeks ago in your name." The room changed. She felt it. The subtle but unmistakable shift of air pressure when people in a room collectively realize that the person they thought they were managing is actually in control. The man at the far end of the table, the one who had held her gaze when she first entered, cleared his throat. "I think," he said carefully, "that we should probably call a recess." His name, she would learn in the next 10 minutes, was Dr. Elias Park. He was the lead independent director on the board. He was 61 years old, Korean-American, and he had been on the Nexus board for 8 years. And he was the person who had sent her the anonymous email. While the other directors filed out of the boardroom in various states of discomfort, Elias Park stayed behind. He poured 2 glasses of water from the carafe on the table, set one in front of the chair beside him, and waited. Natalie sat down. They looked at each other. "The email," she said. "Not a question." He nodded. "I debated it for 3 months. I thought about calling you directly. Then I decided I needed you to find it yourself, or it would look like a setup." A pause. "I'm sorry it took this long. Why now? Why not 2 years ago when Hale came on board?" Elias turned the glass in his hands. "Because 2 years ago, I thought Mercer was still operating within bounds. Aggressive, self-serving, but within the framework of what Randy designed. When Hale came in, everything changed. He looked up. Richard Hale is not an operator, Miss Samuel. He is a deal architect. The Vortex conversation started within 6 months of his arrival. Did you vote against it? There was no formal vote. That's part of the problem. They've been structuring this as a strategic partnership discussion, keeping it just below the threshold that would require a full board resolution. By the time it becomes a formal vote, the terms will have already be agreed to, the announcement already drafted. He paused. They were going to present it to you as a fait accompli. Natalie was quiet for a moment. Outside the glass walls, she could see Mercer in the hallway, phone to his ear. His posture was controlled, but there was something tight in his jaw. How many of the board are with them? At minimum, 7 of the 12. 2 of those 7 are genuinely convinced the Vortex deal is strategically sound. The other 5 are following Mercer because that is what they have done for 5 years, and they see no reason to stop.
The other 5 directors.
Elias smiled slightly. 2 are on the fence, 2 are uncomfortable, but not yet ready to break ranks publicly. And then there is me, he set down his glass, which is not a majority. No, she agreed, but 51% is. He looked at her. Something in his expression shifted. Not surprise exactly, but a kind of recognition. What are you going to do? What I came here to do, she said. Run my company. What happened over the next 72 hours would be covered, eventually, by the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Bloomberg, and 3 separate business school case studies. But in the moment, inside the building where it unfolded, it did not feel like history. It felt like a woman making one phone call at a time. The first call was to her lawyer, Marcus Webb, no relation to Randy, though she had always found the coincidence meaningful, who had been on retainer and up to speed for 3 weeks. Marcus had a shareholder rights attorney from a firm in New York on standby. Within 4 hours of Natalie walking into that boardroom, a legal letter had been filed with the SEC noting a material conflict of interest in the proposed sale of Nexus Dynamics and requesting a temporary halt on any formal proceedings. The second call was to the 2 fence-sitting board members. She called them herself, personally from the conference room on the 32nd floor that Elias had quietly arranged for her to use. No intermediary, no lawyer on the line. Just her voice and her words, and 15 years of a story they already knew, but had been allowed to forget. Both of them agreed to meet with her the next morning. The third call was the one she had been thinking about, since she sat down in that cold leather chair in the hallway. She called Marcus Webb again. I need you to start the process for removing Jonathan Mercer as CEO. A beat. Then, on what grounds? Breach of fiduciary duty, self-dealing, unauthorized negotiation with a third party on behalf of the company without majority shareholder approval. A pause. And I'll need the employment records for Richard Hale going back to his start date. All of them. Natalie. Marcus's voice was careful. This is going to be a fight, I know. Mercer has resources. He has allies. He has spent 5 years building a board that is personally loyal to him. Even with 51%, Marcus. She cut him off gently. I didn't build a $12 billion company by being afraid of a fight. A pause. Start the process. I'll handle the rest. She hung up and looked out the window at the Atlanta skyline. 43 stories below, the city was moving. Cars and people and the ordinary relentless motion of the world. She pressed her hand flat against the glass for a moment and thought about Randy Webb, about a cold pizza box on the floor of a second-floor office, about the way he used to say her name when he was proud of her. Not loudly, not with fanfare, just with a quiet certainty, like there was no other possible outcome. Go remind them, Ari. She took her hand off the glass. She had work to do. If you want to understand what happened next, you need to understand one thing about Jonathan Mercer that most people in his orbit never fully grasped. He was exceptional at holding power, but he was not good at losing it. He had never really had to. His entire career, from his first VP role at a tech startup in Seattle to his tenure at Nexus, had been a sequence of ascents. He had never been removed from a position. He had never been outmaneuvered by someone he had written off, which meant he had never developed the muscle for it. When Natalie walked back into the boardroom that afternoon, After her calls, after the legal filing, after 2 quiet conversations with board members, who suddenly seemed very interested in what she had to say. Mercer made a mistake. He tried to cut a deal. He met her in the hallway outside the elevator bay, alone. He had sent Hale away somewhere. His manner was different now. The boardroom warmth was gone, replaced by something more direct. Calculated. The face of a man who had decided that sincerity was the fastest way through this particular problem. Natalie, can we speak privately for a moment? She looked at him. I want to be honest with you, he said, about what's happened here. I know how this looks. The documents, the timing, I understand why you're alarmed. But there's context you don't have. The Vortex conversation isn't what you think it is. What is it then? It's a hedge. He dropped his voice slightly, not conspiratorially, but in the manner of someone sharing something confidential out of genuine goodwill. We've had 3 consecutive quarters of margin compression in our core solar division. The battery tech we were banking on for 2026 is 18 months behind schedule. The market has moved. I'm not selling Nexus, I'm protecting it. Vortex isn't acquiring us. They're becoming a strategic partner with a minority stake that gives us the capital to survive the next 2 years and come out the other side stronger. He looked at her with the eyes of a man who believed his own story. I should have come to you earlier, he said. That's on me. I misjudged how it would look if you found out through other channels. But Natalie, I have run this company for 5 years. I know these numbers better than anyone. And the Vortex deal is the right move. She let him finish. Then, how much is your personal stake in the deal, Jonathan? His jaw tightened. Just barely. The only tell. That's a separate matter. It's $200 million in Vortex equity, she said quietly. I have the agreement, signed by you 3 weeks ago. A pause. That's not a hedge for the company. That's a payday for you. The sincerity left his face like a light being switched off. What was left was the other Jonathan Mercer, the one she suspected had always been underneath. Not angry, exactly. Not even particularly hostile, just cold. The expression of a man who has been doing math and decided the numbers have changed. You've been gone for 5 years, he said. I know. You walked away. You left me to hold this company together through a pandemic, through the energy transition chaos, through 3 board restructurings, and a class action lawsuit that we settled for $60 million without ever going to trial because I made the right calls at the right times. His voice was controlled, but there was something coiled behind it. You collected your dividends. You did your foundation work. You built your reputation as the visionary founder while I dealt with the actual company. And now you walk back in here with a folder of documents and think you understand what's been happening for 5 years. She looked at him steadily. You're right that I was gone. He seemed slightly thrown by the agreement. And you're right that you ran this company while I was away. Some of it well. I've reviewed the records. A pause. But Randy Webb trusted me with this company before he trusted you. He gave me his shares, his name, and his word. And the one thing he asked me to protect, the one thing, was the mission, clean energy, the thing we built this company to do. She looked at the Vortex logo, still glowing faintly on the darkened presentation screen through the boardroom glass. You want to sell my company to an oil conglomerate, Jonathan, not to save it, to fund your retirement. She turned back to him. I won't let that happen. Mercer looked at her for a long time. Then we'll have to let the board decide, he said. Yes, she agreed. We will. The emergency board meeting was called for 48 hours. In those 48 hours, 3 things happened that no one in the Nexus boardroom had anticipated. The first was the leak, not from Natalie. She had been careful, meticulous about containing the story until she was ready. But someone in that original board session had talked, not to the press, but to an analyst at a financial research firm who happened to write a newsletter, read by about 40,000 people in the investment community. The newsletter ran a brief item. Sources indicate Nexus Dynamics founder Natalie Samuel has returned to Atlanta amid questions about a potential sale of the clean energy firm to Vortex Energy. No confirmation from either party. More soon. By the following morning, that newsletter item had been picked up by Bloomberg, which ran a 400-word piece that ended with the word developing. Nexus stock went up 9%. The market, it turned out, liked Natalie Samuel. The second thing that happened was Richard Hale. Natalie's team had pulled Hale's employment records as she requested, and what they found inside them was not immediately obvious. Hale had been brought in 2 years ago with a compensation package that included, buried in the footnotes of his contract, a clause that entitled him to a performance bonus of $15 million upon completion of a strategic partnership or sale deal valued above $2 billion. A clause that, according to Elias Park, had been approved by a 3-person compensation subcommittee without being disclosed to the full board. It was not illegal on its face. But paired with the Vortex equity stake, it was the kind of thing that, in the hands of a good attorney, told a clear story about motivation. Marcus Webb called Natalie at 6 in the morning on Thursday. Hale's lawyers reached out last night, he said. She was already awake, had been since 4. What do they want? He wants to be removed from the process quietly. Resign, accept a standard separation agreement, no further action. A pause. He's not going to fight you. No, she said slowly. He's not. That leaves Mercer. Mercer will fight, she said. He doesn't know any other way. Yes. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Natalie, the board vote is uncertain. We count 8 directors. We need 7. Elias is locked. 2 of the fence-sitters are leaning your way after yesterday's conversations. That's 4. We need 3 more from Mercer's block. I know. How are you planning to get them? She looked out the window of her hotel suite. The Atlanta skyline was pink and gray in the early morning light. Samuel Tower was visible from here, the brushed steel letters catching the first color of the day. I'm going to tell them the truth, she said. A pause. Which truth? The one Mercer has been hiding for 2 years. She would not reveal what she knew until the board meeting itself. That was a deliberate choice. She had learned. From watching Randy, from watching the investors who had underestimated her, from years of being the person in the room who was not expected to have the decisive card, that the moment you show your hand too early, you give the other side time to build a counter-narrative. So she let the morning pass. She met with the 2 fence-sitters over breakfast at a hotel restaurant near Piedmont Park. She did not talk about Mercer. She talked about Nexus, about the battery technology that was 18 months behind. Because Mercer had cut the R&D budget by 20% to improve quarterly margins, a fact buried in the financial reports that the anonymous documents had led her to. About the solar division's margin compression, which was real but which had a solution. A licensing agreement with a Taiwanese that Nexus had been in quiet negotiations with for 6 months, and which would add $300 million in annual revenue if it closed. An agreement that Mercer's Vortex conversation had quietly put on hold, because Vortex didn't want competition from that technology. She put folders in front of both men. They read. By 9:30, both had confirmed they would vote with her. That was 6. She needed 1 more. His name was Carl Whitfield. He was 64 years old, originally from Birmingham, the only black man on the Nexus board other than Elias Park. And he had been with the company for 12 years, longer than anyone except Natalie herself. He had been brought in by Randy as an early investor and had stayed through every transition. And for the last 5 years, he had voted with Jonathan Mercer on every significant decision. Natalie requested a private meeting with him at 10 o'clock in the lobby of Samuel Tower. She arrived first. When Carl walked in and saw her sitting in the same row of chairs she had sat in the day before, his expression did something complicated. He was a broad man with a quiet manner, and eyes that saw more than they showed. He sat across from her and folded his hands and looked at her the way older men sometimes look at you when they feel responsible for a situation they did not fully create. I should have called you, he said, before she could speak. 2 years ago, when Hale came in, I saw what was happening. Why didn't you? A long pause. Because Mercer told me the company needed stability, that you coming back would create chaos, that the board would fracture, the markets would react badly, and 5 years of work to keep Nexus growing would be undone. He looked at his hands. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. Because the alternative was that I'd been complicit in something I should have stopped. Natalie let the silence sit. I'm not here to blame you, Carl, she said finally. He looked up. I know that you loved Randy. I know you've tried to protect what he built. I know that sometimes you make the choices that seem safest in the moment, because the other choice requires to rest. You're not sure you can afford to lose. She held his gaze. I've made those choices too. I walked away for 5 years because Randy asked me to trust the team, and I was grieving, and it was easier than fighting. A pause. I'm not asking you to carry that. I'm asking you to vote with me today. Carl Whitfield was quiet for a very long time. Then he said, What happens if you win the vote? I stay. I work with whoever on the board is willing to work with me. I don't clean house if I don't have to. I close the Taiwan deal. I fund the R&D budget. And I fight to keep this company doing what it was built to do. And Mercer? That will depend on what he chooses to do after this morning. Another long silence. A security guard walked past. Somewhere in the building, an elevator chimed. Carl Whitfield unfolded his hands and placed them flat on his knees. He took a slow breath and let it out. I'll vote with you, he said. 7. She had 1 hour before the board meeting. She used it to make one more call. Not to a lawyer, not to a board member. To a number she had not dialed in almost a year. It rang twice. Natalie? The voice on the other end was warm and a little surprised. Dr. Grace Webb, Randy's daughter. 40 years old now, with her father's easy laugh and her mother's precision. Grace, I need to ask you something. Of course, your father's shares. The ones he left in trust. They're still managed by the estate attorneys? Yes. What's the directive? A pause. Grace knew the answer. She had always known the answer. Support the majority shareholder's position in all decisions where the company's original mission is at stake. Another pause. Dad wrote it that way on purpose, didn't he? He did. A long silence, not uncomfortable. The silence of two people who loved the same person and were standing on different ends of the same legacy. He knew this might happen someday, Grace said. It was not quite a question. I think he hoped it wouldn't. But yes, he made sure there was a mechanism. A breath. I'm calling to let you know I'm invoking it. I know, Grace said softly. I've been watching the news this morning. A pause. He would be proud of you, Natalie. I want you to know that. Natalie pressed her lips together, kept her voice steady. Thank you, Grace. She hung up. With Randy's estate shares added to her own, she now controlled 58% of Nexus Dynamics. Jonathan Mercer did not know that yet. He would find out in 23 minutes. The boardroom was the same room she had stood in yesterday. Same oval table, same glass walls. Same presentation screen now dark on the wall behind the head chair, which she took without ceremony, and without acknowledging the fact that Mercer had been standing beside it. He sat down at the nearest available seat. His face was composed, professional. He had prepared for this. Elias Park called the meeting to order. Read the purposes of the emergency session. Richard Hale was absent. His resignation had been formally submitted that morning, 2 hours earlier. The chair he had occupied was conspicuously empty. 2 of Mercer's block, directors named Foster and Brennan, looked at the empty chair and then at each other. Something shifted in their calculation. Natalie watched it happen. Elias presented the conflict of interest documentation, the personal compensation agreement, the timeline of the Vortex negotiations relative to the board's formal authorization framework. He was precise and unsparing, and he spoke without heat. The calm, methodical delivery of someone who has been building this case in his head for a very long time. Mercer made his response. It was measured. It was well prepared. It acknowledged, for the first time, the appearance of impropriety in the personal equity stake, but reframed it as an industry-standard retention mechanism negotiated in good faith. He spoke about the company's financial position, about the battery division delays, about the difficult decisions that fell to the people who had stayed and done the work. He was good. Natalie had not stopped thinking that. He was genuinely good. But he was not prepared for what came next. She spoke for 11 minutes. She laid out the Taiwan licensing deal, the one Mercer had put on hold. She put the revenue projections on the screen, sourced from the company's own internal models, prepared by an analyst who had not been consulted when the deal was paused. She showed the board what the next 3 years looked like under the Vortex partnership versus what they looked like if Nexus executed the Taiwan agreement and brought the battery division back online with proper funding. The numbers were not close. Then she put one final document on the screen. It was a letter, handwritten, signed in Randy Webb's unmistakable scrawl, dated 4 years ago, when he knew he was dying and was writing things down that he would not have time to say. To whoever is in that room when the company needs to find its way back. This company was built on one idea, that the future belongs to people who solve problems, not people who sell them. If you are reading this, it means someone has forgotten that. If Natalie is in that room, she has not. Trust her. That is all. She watched the room. Foster and Brennan were the first to look down. The vote was 9-3 in her favor. Mercer voted against. Foster and Brennan voted against. The other 9, including all 4 members of Mercer's bloc who had been present and undecided, voted with Natalie. Jonathan Mercer sat very still for a moment after the result was read. Then he straightened his jacket, picked up his leather portfolio from the table, and stood. He looked at Natalie. She looked back. He did not say anything. He walked out of the boardroom. Natalie watched him go through the glass walls. She watched his reflection in the polished marble of the lobby, passing the photograph of himself that hung on the wall, not slowing, not looking at it. The door to the elevator closed behind him. She turned back to the room. 11 people around a table, most of them blinking, some of them still recalibrating, all of them slightly stunned by the velocity of the last 48 hours. Elias Park caught her eye. His expression was the quiet kind of pleased. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself. Well, he said. Welcome back, Miss Samuel. A beat. Someone at the far end of the table, one of the younger directors, let out a breath that turned into something almost like a laugh. Someone else said Jesus very quietly. One of the older men who had voted against her began methodically gathering his papers with the air of a person who is rethinking many things. Natalie allowed herself exactly 5 seconds to feel it. The weight of it, the enormity of walking back into her own life after 5 years away and finding that the life was still hers. And then she set it aside. Thank you all for being here, she said. I know this wasn't what anyone expected this week. She looked around the table. I want to be clear about something. I am not coming back to run this company the way it was run before, or the way it's been run for the last 5 years. I'm coming back to run it the way it was supposed to be run. The way Randy Webb and I designed it. Mission first. Innovation first. People first. A pause. I don't expect that to be easy. I expect there to be disagreement. I welcome disagreement. What I will not welcome is what we just spent 48 hours cleaning up. So if anyone in this room has a concern about the direction we're heading, I want you to say it to my face, at this table, where we can actually work through it. She looked at the 3 who had voted against her, including the 3 of you. Your votes were registered, and I respect them. Your perspective is still valuable to this company. But we are moving forward. She paused. Let's get to work. What came next was not easy. None of it was easy. In the first week, Mercer's personal legal team filed a wrongful termination suit citing a breach of his employment contract. Marcus Webb had anticipated this and had counterfilings ready within 24 hours. The suit was eventually settled, 6 months later, quietly, for a figure that was significantly less than Mercer had demanded, and significantly more than Natalie had wanted to pay, which is usually what a fair outcome looks like. Richard Hale's departure turned out to be messier than his clean resignation letter had suggested. 2 members of the finance team who had been closely left with him resigned within the first week, and a 3rd was let go after an audit revealed irregularities in the reporting that had obscured the battery division's actual technical progress. It turned out the division wasn't 18 months behind. It was 4 months behind. The reports had been structured to paint a more dire picture of the company's internal capabilities. To make the Vortex deal seem more necessary than it was, Natalie called a company-wide meeting on her 5th day back. Not the executive floor, the entire building. Every department, every floor, connected by video to the offices in 12 other cities and 4 other countries. She stood at the front and spoke for 20 minutes without notes. She told them what had happened, not a filtered version, the real version. She told them why she had been gone for 5 years. She told them what she had found when she came back. She told them what she intended to do. She was halfway through the part about the Taiwan deal when she noticed something. In a section of seats near the middle of the atrium, a group of young engineers had begun to cry. Not dramatically, just quietly, in the way people do when they have been holding something in for a long time, and something finally makes it possible to let it go. She kept talking. But she held that image somewhere in herself, because she understood it. These were people who had believed in this company, who had stayed through everything. The pandemic years, the leadership transition, the budget cuts, the quarterly reports that told them the battery division was failing, the memos about strategic partnerships that didn't quite explain what they meant. They had stayed because they believed in what Nexus was supposed to be. And somewhere in the last 2 years, the belief had gotten harder to hold. She had come back and made it easier again. That was, she realized, the most important thing she had done in the boardroom. Not the vote, not the legal filings, the simple act of showing up. The Taiwan deal closed 11 weeks later. The press release was picked up by every major business publication. Nexus's stock price, which had already risen 14% since Natalie's return became public, added another 11 points in the 2 days after the announcement. The Wall Street Journal ran a profile. The founder returns. How Natalie Samuel reclaimed her empire. She did a single interview, 30 minutes, which she used mostly to talk about the battery technology and what it would mean for the energy transition timeline. When the interviewer tried to push her toward the drama, the boardroom confrontation, Mercer, the anonymous documents, she redirected each time. The story of this company is not about what almost happened to it, she said. It's about what it's going to do next. She meant it, and the work bore that out. But here is the part of the story that the Wall Street Journal did not print, because it did not fit in any of the categories that business journalism uses to organize events into meaning. 3 months after the board vote, Natalie received a letter. Not an email. A handwritten letter on plain paper in careful and slightly shaky handwriting. The return address was New Mexico she had never heard of. The letter was from Elena Vasquez's mother, not Elena herself, her mother, a 63-year-old woman named Rosa, who had worked as a cleaning contractor in commercial office buildings for 28 years, who had put Elena through school, who had watched the news coverage of what had happened at Samuel Fowl Tower and written a letter to the woman in the story, because, she said, she needed to say something to someone. My daughter called me the night after you came to the building. She was very upset. Not about you, about herself. She said, she looked right at you and saw nothing worth looking at. She said she was the one who told you to wait in a chair in the hallway. She said she was embarrassed. She asked me, Mama, what does it mean when you become the kind of person who does exactly what was done to you your whole life? Who looks at someone and decides they don't belong before you even know who they are? I didn't know what to say to her, so I'm writing to you instead. My question is this: how do you come back from that? Not what happened with the company. I mean, how do you keep going after people look right at you and decide you are nothing? How do you not let it change you into something you don't want to be? Natalie read the letter twice. Then she set it down and sat with it for a long time. She wrote back. She did not write a short response. She wrote 4 pages. She wrote about the hallway, about the 6 minutes, about what it had felt like to sit in that chair and watch the room through the glass and feel the particular weight of invisibility that she had been carrying, in different forms, for her entire life. She wrote about her mother, who had worked double hospital shifts and never once let her feel like the world owed her anything. She wrote about Randy Webb and what it had meant to build something with someone who genuinely did not care what you looked like, only what you were capable of. She wrote, "The question your daughter is asking is the right question. The fact that she is asking it means she is already different from the person who pointed me toward that hallway. Most people don't ask that question at all. They just keep going. She wrote, "What I've learned after everything is that the most dangerous thing about being underestimated is not what it does to you. It's what it tempts you to do back, to become small, to become cautious, to stop believing that the room you deserve to be in is worth fighting for." The 6 minutes in that hallway were not the hardest thing I faced that day. The hardest thing was deciding, after 5 years of absence and grief, and letting myself be told a story about a company I built, that I still had the right to walk through that door. You always have that right. Whatever room it is, whatever hallway they make you wait in, the right is not given to you by the people who control the room. It is yours already. She mailed the letter to New Mexico. 4 days later, Elena Vasquez knocked on the door of Natalie's office on the 40th floor. She looked nervous, prepared for something difficult. She had a letter in her hand. Her mother's letter, the one Natalie had sent. "I wanted to come and say," she stopped, started again. "I'm sorry for how I treated you that morning. I know you said I was just doing my job. I wasn't. I was doing something else. And I know that sorry doesn't." "Sit down, Elena," Natalie said. Elena sat. Natalie looked at her, young, sharp, the kind of eyes that notice things. "What did you study?" Natalie asked. Elena blinked. "Business. Concentration in operations management. From Georgia State." "What do you want to do with it?" A pause. "I don't know anymore. I thought I wanted to be an executive, work my way up. But I've spent 2 years as an assistant and I'm not sure I've been learning what I thought I would learn." "No," Natalie agreed. "You probably haven't." She was quiet for a moment. "I'm restructuring the leadership pipeline here. I'm looking for people who can learn how a company actually operates. Not as observed from above, but from inside the work. Who are willing to be uncomfortable and ask hard questions and change their minds when the evidence requires it." Elena was very still. "I'm not offering you a VP title," Natalie said. "I'm offering you a chance to learn. It will be difficult. It will require you to say things in rooms where people don't want to hear them. You'll be wrong sometimes. When you are, I'll tell you, and I'll expect you to sit with that and figure out why." A pause. "Is that something you want?" Elena looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," she said. The battery technology came online 14 months later, not 18 months behind schedule. 4. The delay Mercer had reported was, as the audit had suggested, manufactured. A combination of understated progress reports and a deliberate slowdown in equipment procurement that had been reversed the moment Natalie approved the R&D budget restoration. The announcement was made at a press conference in Atlanta. Natalie stood at the podium in the same building she had stood outside 5 years ago. Behind her was a working prototype of the new battery cell, a technology capable of storing solar energy for 72 continuous hours. A breakthrough that tripled the viability of solar as a primary energy source in regions without consistent sun. The reporters in the room were asking questions about market projections, about licensing, about what this meant for the industry. All reasonable questions. All the right questions for a business story. And she answered them. She was precise and clear, and she gave them the numbers they needed. But in her chest, something quieter was happening. She was thinking about a garage in Atlanta 15 years ago. About 2 people who believed that the future belonged to those who solved problems, not those who sold them. About the ones who had tried to sell it anyway. About 6 minutes in a hallway and what it had taken to stand back up. About the fact that the letters on the building still said her name. She had put them back herself, 3 weeks after the board vote, not Randy's name. He would have argued against it, and she would have won because she was right. And he always knew when she was right. But beside where his portrait now hung again, back on the wall where it belonged, she had hung something else, not a photograph. A small framed print of his handwriting. The line from the letter. "If Natalie is in that room, she has not. Trust her." After the press conference, she walked back through the lobby alone, past the portraits, past the revolving doors, out onto the sidewalk where she had stood on a cold morning 15 months ago, looking up at a building she had built and felt nothing but cold. She looked up at it now. The letters gleamed in the afternoon sun, brushed steel against a clear Atlanta sky. She had She had not cried when they put her in this building the first time. She had cried from disbelief. Now she felt something different. Not disbelief, not triumph. Something steadier than both. Something that had taken 15 years and 5 years away, and 6 minutes in a hallway and a boardroom, and a handwritten letter from New Mexico, and a young woman knocking on her door. A thing you build with other people, and then have to rebuild alone, and then have to keep building every single day. Not because the building is ever finished, but because the building is the point. She took a breath. She turned and walked back inside. There was work to do, but we are getting ahead of ourselves, because the story doesn't end in a lobby on a clear afternoon. Stories like this one, the kind built from setbacks and invisibility, and the slow hard work of reclaiming what is yours, don't end anywhere. They continue. They compound. They become the foundation of the next chapter and the one after that. Let me tell you what happened to the people in this story. Richard Hale went to work for a private equity firm in Dallas. He left the industry quietly and permanently 18 months later. His name does not appear in any business publication after that. Jonathan Mercer wrote a book. It was called Building Forward: Leadership in a Transitional Economy. It sold modestly. It did not mention Natalie Samuel or Nexus Dynamics. Reviewers noted that it was well written but felt curiously abstract, as if the author had learned everything about leadership from theory and nothing from experience. The irony of that assessment was not lost on anyone who knew the full story. Foster and Brennan, the 2 board members who had voted against Natalie, stayed on the board. Both of them, within the first year, became some of her most vocal internal supporters. People contain multitudes. Situations reveal different ones. She had learned not to write people off for the choices they made in a single room on a single morning. Elias Park remained lead independent director. He served for 3 more years before retiring. At his farewell dinner, he gave a toast that the other attendees would quote for years afterward. He said, "The most important decision I made in my career was not a business decision. It was the decision to write an email to a woman I believed would know what to do with the truth. I did not know if she would come. I did not know if she would win. I only knew that the story needed its real author back in the room." Carl Whitfield retired from the board 2 years later and donated us a substantial portion of his Nexus equity to a scholarship fund, the Randy Webb Scholarship, for first-generation STEM students at historically Black colleges and universities. When the first class of scholars was announced, Natalie was in the room. She sat next to Grace Webb, Randy's daughter, who by then had joined the Nexus Foundation Board as a trustee. They held hands during the announcement of the names. Neither of them cried, almost. And Elena Vasquez. She spent 18 months in the leadership development program Natalie had described on that afternoon in the 40-story office. It was, as promised, difficult. She was wrong several times. She said things in rooms where people didn't want to hear them, and she said them anyway. She changed her mind when the evidence required it. She stayed late. She asked the hard questions. She grew. At the end of the 18 months, Natalie offered her a role on the operations team. She accepted. Within 3 years, she had been promoted twice. Within 5, she was running the company's largest domestic division, the same one that managed the battery rollout that had made Nexus the most talked-about company in the clean energy sector. And on a Tuesday morning in the early spring of the 5th year, Elena Vasquez stood in a conference room in the Atlanta headquarters and presented a quarterly report to a group of investors that included, among others, 2 venture capital partners who had repeatedly passed on investing in Nexus's early rounds. Because, as one of them had said at the time, they didn't see the leadership team as serious enough. They sat in front of her now, iPads out, ready to write a very large check. Lena presented for 40 minutes, clean, sharp, unimpeachable. The kind of presentation that doesn't just answer the questions the room thinks it's asking, but the questions underneath those questions, the ones about conviction and momentum, and whether the people running a company truly understand what they have built. After it was over, one of the VC partners, the one who had made the comment about the leadership team, years ago, before Elena had ever heard of Nexus Dynamics, said that it was the best pitch he had heard in 5 years. Elena thanked him. Then, she walked out of the conference room and down the hallway and into the elevator and up to the 40th floor, where Natalie Samuel was sitting at a desk covered in papers and a cold cup of coffee, reading a proposal from the Taiwan team. Elena knocked on the open door. Natalie looked up. "They're in," Elena said. Natalie looked at her for a moment, smiled. "Good work," she said. Elena nodded, turned to leave. "Elena," she stopped. "Thank you," Natalie said, "for knocking on my door that day." Elena was quiet for a moment. "You're the one who opened it," she said. She walked back down the hallway. "There is one more thing you need to know. On the day the battery technology was first deployed at scale, not a prototype, not a pilot, but a full commercial installation at a solar farm in New Mexico that could power a city of 400,000 people. Natalie drove out to see it, not with a press team, not with a board member or a lawyer or an investor, alone. She parked on the side of a desert road and walked to a fence line and looked at a field of solar panels stretching to the horizon, connected by cables to a row of battery storage units the size of shipping containers. Quiet technology, unheroic, deeply, profoundly useful. She stood there for a long time. The sun was going down behind the mountains to the west, and the panels were glowing in it. That particular orange-pink that the desert does in the last hour of the day, the light that makes you feel like the world is on fire in the best possible way. She took out her phone and took a photograph. Not for social media, not for a press release, just for herself. Then she put the phone away and stood there a while longer, in the desert quiet, with the setting sun and the silently working machines that would store its energy through the night and give it back in the morning. This was the thing. This, right here. Not the boardroom, not the stock price, not the profile in the journal, not the applause after the press conference. This field of panels converting sunlight into power that would flow into homes and hospitals and schools and charge the phones that people would use to call their families and play their music and look up the things they needed to know. This was why. She breathed the dry desert air, somewheres out in New Mexico, in a town she had been shown on a map but never visited. Rosa Vasquez was probably making dinner, probably watching the news, probably proud of her daughter in ways she could not yet fully articulate. Natalie thought about the letter, about what she had written back. You always have that right, whatever room it is, whatever hallway they make you wait in. The light changed. The sky went from orange to deep rose to the first suggestion of purple. She got back in her car. She had work to do. She always had work to do. That was not a burden. That was the whole point. If this story means something to you, if you have ever been the one waiting in the hallway, if you have ever had something you built handed to someone who looked more like what power is supposed to look like, if you have ever had to choose between walking through a door and walking away, then share it, not for the algorithm, not for the views, because someone you know needs to see it today. Someone who is 6 minutes from making the most important decision of their life and doesn't know it yet. Someone who needs to be reminded that the right to walk through the door is already theirs. Share this. Follow for more stories about the people who were supposed to fail but didn't. And subscribe, because we are just getting started. The next story drops soon, and trust me, you are not ready for it.